Welcome to this edition of Whiskey and Wealth Tech. I'm your host, Alex Sermon, Managing Director here at First Rate. Today, I am joined by Steve Campisi of the Pensar Group. So, Steve, thank you so much for joining me today.
Happy to be here, Alex. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Absolutely. So, we're having a unique episode today. We're tangentially moving away from whiskey for a moment for our drink of choice for this episode, and we are diving into the world of port wine. So, for those of you who are unfamiliar with port, this is a sweet wine, a dessert wine from Portugal in Oporto, Portugal. And it is a favorite of mine. I've actually gotten to go to Portugal and tour some of the port houses, things like that. And so I've really fallen in love with this wine, and it is tangentially related to whiskey because many whiskeys are actually finished in port barrels, and so that adds really nice flavor to whiskey that I really enjoy, which got me into drinking port itself. And so, Steve, why don't you tell us a little bit about what port are we drinking today, since this was your suggestion?
And I can't claim credit for that. I deferred to my daughter, who's something of an enophile and really studies up on this stuff. And she knows I'm not too much of a drinker myself. I'll have some coquito at Christmas and maybe toast some champagne. But the little bit of wine that I do drink is port. It goes down easy, it's very tasty, and she gave me this recommendation. I think this is like a value investment in terms of wine because it's not very expensive and it's very good quality, very highly reviewed, highly rated. Um, it's supposedly known for its fruitiness and perhaps a little spice. I learned to go swill like this. My daughter shows off by swilling it so aggressively. You think she's going to spill it, but no, nary a drop. I'll have to practice on that.
Yeah, I'm not confident enough to start slinging it around. Otherwise, my computer and my desk will be covered. But so we can give this one a bit of a taste. So cheers.
Cheers. Hmm.
Mm,
Smooth, is it not?
that's very smooth. And as wine goes, I can tell it's a young wine. And one of the things that we notice about it, this is a ruby port, and so there's different kinds of port. There's rubies, there's vintage, coletas, and then tawny ports. So most people know the rubies and the tawny. You might have heard of white port, but the main difference between ruby and tawny is that these rubies are aged in steel vats, whereas the tawny ports spend some of their life in wood. So for those of you that are whiskey drinkers, the tawny port tends to kind of mix well with the whiskey drinkers, whereas the ruby ports tend to mix well with people that are more wine centric. So kind of like more like your Pinot Noirs, some of your fruitier
A
wines.
testimony to this is I'm on my I'm about to take my fifth sip. I'm practically swilling this. I thought to myself we should have gotten some good tasty chocolate, maybe a cake or something like that to pair with this. There's that whole thing of chocolate and port pairing, maybe some
Mhm.
cheese.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
but I thought too late.
It's really good. It's very fruity, very fruit forward. It's got some spice to it. It's a Can't tell if you can see on the camera too much, but absolutely beautiful ruby red color. So if you kind of look at it, get a little white background, it's just beautiful color. And one of the interesting things about port is that some bottles you have to drink the whole bottle the moment you open it. You can't save it, and then others you can keep for years. And so this is one of those bottles that it's not going to go bad.
Mm.
In a day, you can have it for several months. Keep it in a cool, dark place, and you'll be good. Whereas if you get, say, a vintage port that has the year on it, um, that one you want to save for a special occasion because that's the kind that you let age in the bottle for a long time. And then once you open it, you drink the whole thing. So bring all your friends and family over and celebrate the occasion. Um, but this is a wonderful one that we'll be able to continue enjoying for the next few months.
All right, one more cheers for the road here before we get to work.
So now jumping into the heart of the episode here. So Steve, you have a very interesting background, and so really love for you to kind of share your experiences, where you've come from in the industry, and what's gotten to where you are now, which is primarily research based and a real influencer in the performance measurement industry.
Thanks, Alex. Thanks for those kind remarks. I had an unusual path towards investments. My background's originally in music, and even with that, I got rather a late start. I'm a flutist. I started teaching myself to play after I graduated high school and got a teacher. I was fortunate to have two really great teachers since I was in the New York City area. One played with the Metropolitan Opera Orchestra, the other with the New York Philharmonic, and I was happy and really blessed to have 7 years of study with them. I also was a music student. I earned a bachelor's and master's and taught junior high school for about 4 years. But summers, I worked at the investment department of an insurance company. And I was in the back of the back office. You couldn't be any more back office than me. I was in data verification. But I'll tell you that if you read by yourself 600 or 700 loan indentures, you learn how the bond and the private bond market works, one bond at a time. I eventually created a career there in the industry, and I was doing one-off researchy things for the investment department. Went and got an MBA, got some learning on this stuff. Everything was new to me. I was seeing it all at the graduate level for the first time. And then I did a CFA exam program. It took 3 years to do that. And all that while, I was integrating the analytics and the academics with real practice. I think that's a matter of attitude. Some people think there's the books and here's real life. No, they're both part of real life. And there's an advantage in having that attitude early on because you find what you're looking for. If you find that analytics, you will find that analytics are useful if you begin with that attitude. And so I started teaching graduate school classes in investments. I started teaching the CFA review course for other practitioners. And so I moved along the gamut in terms of education, but I've always been a teacher. And that's been a real joy to me, particularly to find some individuals with promise and help them. And you find that you can add to the book learning that you get in academic programs and certification programs. But then there's the idea of learning how to apply what you know. We all know more than we think, but we've got to be guided in how to apply it. And so my goal was to help move people along the learning curve. Something might have taken me 15 years of my own research to learn through discovery. I'm not discovering it for the first time, discovering it for myself. But that's how the best learning is done. And so I was able to guide people and move them along by a factor of, say, 10 times less time than it took me.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been a joy to me in the industry to help move some people in their careers along because of their initiative. But quite frankly, a lot of it is wax on, wax off, because we're not taught the fundamentals. We're taught to the test. There's never enough time to do it right, but there's always enough time to do it over. You may have heard that expression. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and so I've always been a teacher in the industry and have always used the analytics in terms of my own investing. And that's how I moved from having my check cut by the systems department to suddenly being a portfolio manager. I was never an analyst. I was never a programmer. I was always coordinating between the two groups,
Mm-hmm.
higher level macro thoughts. I had the luxury of doing that because I worked on things like large scale systems development or analytics and risk management and that sort of thing. And so my next move, I spent about 12 years in information. Then I spent another 12 years in the bond portfolio management world. We were a total return, multi-sector, sector rotation bond portfolio, but for an insurance company. And we understood that this wasn't about total return net only. This was about paying for those liabilities. It's the ultimate LDI investing. That's where I cut my bones, and that's where I formed my perspective that the portfolio is not an end in itself, it's a means to an end. And that's how you get to real client-centered, goals-based investing. There are a lot of people talking about that, few who are really doing it, and fewer still who are doing it well. But it's been the focus of my investing. So I was part of a three-member team. We had a $13 billion bond portfolio. We were putting 150 million a month of new money to work in the markets. And you get a chance to really be part of this duality of individual bond purchases in the current markets, but part of a bigger bond portfolio that's tied to liabilities. And I took that perspective to the multi-asset class environment for another dozen years or so, where I was managing money for endowments and foundations. And people give you their money. They're not just giving you money, they're giving you their hopes and their dreams. They're putting their financial future, which has to be paid for, in your hands. And that's a sacred trust. That's the difference between the discretionary part of investing and the advisory part. So many people have advisors who simply make recommendations, but every decision is the client's decision. There's no recourse to that side of the business. Now, there's a place for it, but that wasn't my place. My place was investing so that we could pull, say, 5% out of the portfolio every year and put it to work for the beneficiaries, whether it was an endowment, which is for a single client beneficiary, or for a foundation that could be a variety of beneficiaries and uses and good works across some geographic area. I used to call that the permanent good, because once that money is spent, it's a kid that got some eyeglasses or some healthcare or some tutoring, whatever.
Mhm.
And that's a great way to invest. So I encourage people to think about the client and start thinking about that client-focused investing, which isn't about statistics. Nobody invests for statistics. They invest for money. Do I have enough money to pay the bills, and can I keep going generation after generation? And that led me to doing this kind of research, because the traditional performance analytics, the traditional asset allocation left a lot of questions unanswered. In fact, they weren't even asked, but asking the right questions, that's the bigger part. Knowing where to dig is more important than being a good digger with a shovel. And so I had to develop these answers on my own. And I just carved out enough time to do it. I think that's why I was encouraging performance people to do that. Carve out some time, find something that you think will work at your shop, and go propose it and take the initiative. Don't just react, because the industry, it's not really moving forward as much as it could be in this regard.
Mhm.
Long story. Thanks for listening.
Well, thank you, Steve. And that leads very well into, why we're kind of meeting here today. So you have been working with me and First Rate on a series of articles that we're collaborating on around fiduciary responsibility. And so the first three articles have come out, and are out in the world. People have been reading them. We've been getting a lot of great feedback on them. But could you really tell me about, what caused you want to write these specific articles? This is really around institutional firms and their fiduciary responsibility and understanding risk from a client's perspective. So kind of what led you to this particular topic, and kind of what's your goal for these series? What are you hoping readers get out of it, and hoping what action would they take once they've read through the
Mm,
articles?
mm. Your question is a little tutorial in itself of the value of this approach. Um, because I was an institutional investor, I had about $2 billion that I was responsible for investing. And as I went along, answering my own questions with this kind of research, uh, I started naturally guiding other investment managers. And halfway through my dozen years or so doing that, I detached half of my book, kept another billion. Um, and because you should be in the game, you should be actively investing and then writing about it. While I was doing that, I'd come up with questions that were critical for my clients. One key question, which is the least glamorous but most important factor of your success, is what's a sustainable withdrawal rate from your portfolio? Now, it depends on whether you're keeping this for 30 years and then it ends like a retirement portfolio. So this is applicable to individuals. Or is it meant to be done in perpetuity, like an endowment and a foundation? How much can you spend? You would be aghast at the minimum amount of research that goes into that decision. People will say, I think I'm going to earn 7.5%. Inflation's 2.5%, so I can spend 5. Yeah, you can spend 5 as long as you're guaranteed always to get 7.5. But what about the fact that it's down sometimes? Sometimes it's down 3 years in a row. What then? Because the market will have eroded your portfolio, and each time your dollar withdrawal is a larger percent of the portfolio, so you are on a trajectory downward. And it would help if the industry would talk about real values, but no, they continue with the canard of nominal values. Look at what it's really worth, and you start to see that you continue overspending. It goes down a little, and then it hits an inflection point and is on its way to crashing and burning. So this was an important question. And I came up with pretty much zero real analytical guidance from the academic part. So started my own. This became a whole facility at my last employer, and it reoriented how they did the entire business to where they said, I can't imagine before we thought this way. What were we thinking? We're beating the benchmark. It doesn't work if you beat the benchmark and you underperform because you don't have enough money to keep going. Right? You've been a steward of those assets for 30 years, and you're handing over 85% of what was given to you to the next generation. So this idea of intergenerational equity, doing as much for the next generation as this current generation, that's a critical thing. Legally, that's an important thing. It's a responsibility. And as a fiduciary, that should be your first thought. You shouldn't be thinking about the portfolio first. If anything, you're going to think, what return should I get from the portfolio? Okay, but am I going to stress test this so I have some guidance on where am I going to be? Let's say if everything doesn't go my way, what if I if I overestimate the return I'm going to get? I get the lower quartile of returns. How much is that? Research will tell you, and this is not hard to do, it's somewhere around 150 basis points. Okay, 150 basis points is not a world of difference. You wouldn't be falling over dead with shock that you had 150 under what you expected. But that could be the difference between success and failure, where you define success as withdrawing what you expected and preserving, at least, if not growing, what you were given for the next generation. So this approach emerges from that. When you're facing your clients and you're talking about critical things, and the question comes up, am I okay? Do I have enough to keep going? That should be something you can answer with great confidence. I couldn't until I did my own research. So I've come to see firsthand that establishing this holistic, goals-based approach that's rooted in fiduciary responsibility and stewardship. And I know stewardship is something that's at the heart and soul of First Street. And that's why it resonates with you. And I greatly appreciate that. And working with you guys, that you have to start here. We can't start with asset allocation and mean variance optimization and stock picking. That's 3 or 4 steps down the road. We first have to say, why are we here? What are we here to do? What are our duties to our client? And what do we need to get ready for in order to satisfy that? And that's why I think that building this set of first 3 articles dealing with fiduciary responsibility, the mission of the organization and its goals, and then what I say, how are we going to pay for this? That's when the investment part comes in. It's like at best 3rd on the list, not 1st on the list. I would tell my clients, we're philanthropic investors, and the word philanthropic comes first for a reason. And that's the opportunity, you can start to give other people, which is to capture your client's heart first. Before you wow them with your dazzling investment acumen, let them know that you're really their true partner because you feel what they feel and their goals are your goals. Is that too preachy? I don't know.
Well, if you're gonna get on a soapbox, this is the forum to do it. But I
It's
totally
the poor
agree.
talking.
But I totally agree, and I think that having these articles and really with the goal of getting people to understand what what's important here. We need to put first things first. We need to understand that our clients, their goals and their needs and their wants are the most important. And what are they really? They're not always just return based or things like that, but it's how can we fulfill our mission? And how are you helping facilitate doing that? And coming at it from that direction and looking at, what are the risks, what are the goals from the client's eyes, and how can you, as the fiduciary, help them achieve that? So,
Yeah, if you want to get your client to say, wow, in a meeting, or this is almost too good to be true. I've had clients say that to me because I stopped showing them statistics. I said, here's a simple picture. Here's a graph of your portfolio, what you hoped it would do, grow with inflation. Here's your real portfolio. It grew. In the good years, we weren't spending every dime we made. We weren't spending like drunken sailors. We were spending enough according to a plan, and the rest became a surplus. And there was more money at times of larger returns. This is a great thing because it built up a surplus. And we're able to show them things like on our watch, we got to 2000, the year 2000, the market was going to take a big turn downward. It was going to lose double digits over 3 years. And you were going to be withdrawing 5% in each of those years. Yeah, you were going to probably lose a third of your portfolio. But the good news was we built up such a surplus prior to that. We had a 50% surplus. Where's the statistics that says this is your funding ratio? In most portfolios, it's not there. It's not there at all. It's starting to be there on the pension side because they were forced to do it by legislation. And they're now leading the industry in terms of real goals-based investing. But we were able to show them, wow, all this time we were growing a surplus. We were also growing the amount that we were withdrawing relative to your goal. But we weren't doing that at the expense of the portfolio. We were able, with a 50% surplus, to lose half and still be fully funded. So you're okay. This was the ultimate stress test that you're doing a good job as a fiduciary. And we were able to give this message to them so that they can go out to donors and say, who would you rather give your dollar to? Somebody else, like some of these leading institutions that were cutting back their programs just when the need was greatest, or us who were standing tall and increasing the support when the need was greatest. See, that's a wow story. And it comes from what? What you talked about, being a good fiduciary, knowing what comes first, and acting that way in the investment program.
absolutely, and having a process that you follow and the
Mm.
discipline to do it. So, as for those of you who know me personally, my favorite football coach is Nick Saban, sadly formerly of Alabama, my alma mater. But he always said you got to trust the process, and that's why he was consistently a winner. There were up years and there were down years, but you trust the process, and that's what brings you success. And understanding what are your goals, what are the outcomes you're trying to achieve, what are the steps you need to do to get there, because at the end of the day, that's what's most important is, are you following that process to do those things, or are you focusing too much on the outcome and missing that?
Right.
So that's wonderful. And so we've got these first three articles out. We're continuing to do more series. So what's next? What's the next topic on the agenda?
Well, I'm going to be following the process, as you said. Our first step in this was to outline the fiduciary and stewardship aspect of it. That's sort of the plan. You now have to turn the plan into a portfolio. And step one of that is getting a reasonable strategy that's going to be expected to deliver on those goals that the client has, those monetary goals. The asset allocation process is what I'm talking about. This is the forward-looking analytics, and it starts with sense of what's in the markets. Now we have to admit we have no idea what's in the markets. We will have a reasonable estimate based on a lot of analytics, a lot of economic thought, investment thought. Marry all that together, we come up with a set of expectations of our returns, volatilities, correlations between the assets. How will they fit together to be a portfolio that'll deliver the return we believe that we need with a level of risk that's not going to undermine our success? That could be done more or less rigorously, and it could be done more or less in the context of client goals. So you can't probably write just one asset allocation article. I think there will be a few, just like we had to have 3 articles to talk about the holistic goals-based client-centered approach. I expect to see a couple of articles on asset allocation, all of it looking at a practical issue, which is how do I get the best diversification? I don't want to over diversify. I don't want to have redundancies. I don't want to have things that have different names, but they act the same. I'd rather just have a reasonable number of inputs, but know that I'm getting what I've called the double-barreled benefit of diversification. You hear anybody talk, you can go get an MBA or go get a CFA charter, they'll talk about the fact that diversification lowers risk. They're giving you half the story because diversification also increases the return because volatility is a drag on return. You expect to get this return any one year, plus or minus, let's say, some volatility in that year. Well, that's the same truth in the long run. Volatility drags down your achieved year over year return, which is your goal. So you'll find that you have two statistics. If you had to give your clients statistics, you'd say there are two things we're doing for you with this asset allocation. We're lowering your year-to-year volatility by X basis points. We're also increasing your portfolio's compound return by a certain amount. And it's in the range of 35 to 50 basis points. Now that's as much as moving from a 60-40 to a 70-30. But we're doing it through diversification, not having to take a more aggressive stance. So here again, it's this notion of really understanding the quant. They don't teach us that well enough, quite frankly, in any of these programs. They're teaching to the test. They're leaving some insights on the table. So I bring that into the work that I do. And in our asset allocations, we're going to start with that. Generally, what's the benefit of diversification? What about the constraints that we use? Oh, I only want to have 70% in my home country, no less than that. Does that cost you diversification? You should know how to ask and answer those questions. Let's do what we can, pull all the levers that we can, get the best solution for our client. So I think that's going to be part 2 of this. Another couple of 3 articles on getting a good strategy. After that, I can imagine moving towards, let's fill it up with investments. What could we do there?
Mm-hmm.
How much should we be active? How much should we do passive? These are all questions that we're going to address. And I think when all of this is said and done, your little investment program you'll have in terms of, short, not too tedious to read articles that fill out this mosaic.
I think it's going to be great. I've really enjoyed the responses that we've gotten from the existing articles. I think people are going to get a lot out of the upcoming articles as well. And to your point, this really fills the mosaic of what's the investment process, what's this cycle, what's this look like, and how can you do this in a way that really is looking at it from the client's view and benefiting them in the long run, and doing it in an intelligent and efficient way. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how this impacts the industry, and hopefully some people make changes for the better, having read these bite-sized articles.
And hopefully this philosophy of risk first, it goes right through the entire process. And so to say that we're doing every aspect of managing your money with a consistent philosophy, it's not like some organizations are large enough to have silos. This one does this part, this one, this is the economics guy, this is the asset allocation part, here's the portfolio construction. We're taking a common philosophy. And at the center of it all is who? The client.
Absolutely. Now I've got one final question for you before we wrap things up. So you're doing a lot of things that other people don't do, and that's what you try to share with people. That's what you try to help other people learn. What's something that you feel like everybody should be doing in this industry but aren't?
Besides listening to me, right? Oh, wait, but this one's going to be listening to me more of me. I really feel that risk attribution is the missing part of everything we do. It pervades everything. It's part of everything. Risk is what we do, what we manage. You manage risk, and the great market God gives you a certain return for the risk you've taken. That could be market risk, could be various aspects of active risk. We need to be aware of the risks we are taking, but we also need to be aware of how each decision adds to the overall risk of whatever we're talking about. Now, if you ask people this question, they will not have answers for you. If you say you've just done a mean variance optimization using the Markowitz algorithm, which is nothing more than a big weighted average. It's really not that complicated. If it seems complicated, you really don't know it. But stick with us. We may touch on that at some point in the future. You know, um, if you looked at a forward-looking asset allocation, you'd say, okay, here's my strategy. It's X, Y, Z amount of these assets. And its overall volatility is this number. Okay, how much of that number comes from each of your components? Just silence, crickets in the industry. We're not taught that. Oh, shouldn't you know that? I think you should. The same is true when you have funds in a portfolio. Here's their active return. Here's their tracking error. How much tracking error versus how much return came from each fund? Talking about the active return. The secret that they don't teach you in books is that when a portfolio is efficient, it gets that way because, drum roll, every asset contributes as much to risk as it does to return. If you didn't have that, you wouldn't have an efficient portfolio. You'd have one thing contributing 80% of the risk and 20% of the return, and the other contributing 20% of the risk and 80% of the return. Now, any one of your clients would say, I think you should put your money in that one, not the first one. Can you move some money there? And that's what the optimization black box is doing. It's moving this money around till everybody, every dog in the sled is pulling his own weight. That's how we have to think. That's the part that we're missing. We've had the Brinson algorithm, the holy grail, right? That people bow before to get performance attribution. And they're only talking about one side. They're only talking about the return side. And we haven't made a dime's worth of progress in 4 decades. Next year is the big anniversary for the Brinson's first article. When he created that, it was just a comment about pension funds. And he wasn't really talking about all the little pieces. He just wanted to say, the active part that you're all spending time on is really actually a detractor to performance. But we've taken that and made it the holy grail. We're calculating it every day for all the sectors, never meant to be used that way, but we're happy. I would say, fine, if you're happy, I'm happy, but can you tell me something about risk? And that's the part I'm trying to push the industry towards. And I think we need to have the clients asking these questions. Somebody has to be saying to the clients, you should be able to ask this. You'd ask this of your plumber or your electrician. We're no different. We're no better. We should be able to tell you if these decisions are worth the risk they're giving to you. So there's my one thing. If you said, just give me this one thing, I'll be a happy man.
I agree, and I know you both, you and I both pound that drum plenty frequently, so we're very much on the same page of that. But this has been an absolutely wonderful episode. It's been a great time catching up with you, Steve,
Thanks.
and getting your insight, your experience. I think our listeners are going to really enjoy it. And so thank you for listening in, everyone. If you have questions for Steve, please feel free to reach out, comments, add it to the post wherever you're listening from, and we'll happily have Steve answer that in our upcoming episode. And so we will also be in a short clip here answering the questions for Pete Baksh from our last episode, and we'll be hearing what he has to say on those questions that were presented. So thanks for tuning in, and hope you listen to next month's episode. So thank you. So on our last episode, we had Pete Baksh from the First National Bank of Mount Dora as our guest, and we had a question for him from Nishimwe Gorith. She asked, what types of data should firms show in order to help show transparency, especially on topics such as ESG to their clients? And so here's the answer from Pete for you, Nishimwe. So he says, start out with great question, and the answer is nuanced. It really depends on the client because an institutional investor is going to want and need much more granularity in the data rather than what most individual investors need, let alone want. So the main answer to the question is that an investment manager needs to be prepared to deliver whatever level of detail and data that the clients ask for. It's important to be aware of the precise level, though, because in this area, I subscribe to the less is more philosophy. So when we begin to introduce too many things in a performance review, we create a lot more confusion rather than less. So for an institutional client or a highly sophisticated individual investor, we're going to provide detailed information about the statistical properties of the portfolio and its components, along with performance metrics such as the Sharpe ratio, the information ratio, trainer, etc. We compare our variance and returns with the benchmark and report our tracking error in beta. We may share quantitative details about how our model is optimized as well, or as the results of our Monte Carlo analysis of the portfolio. Now, for an individual investor, we're going to report performance against the benchmark, the beta, and simply discuss any variances in the performance between the portfolio and benchmark. For this kind of client, all of the detailed information discussed with the institutional client would simply be overkill. So the individual investor typically has a much different objective, mainly to achieve funding for their dreams and goals while minimizing their risk. Therefore, it's not necessary or even desirable to get into the weeds. Instead, we focus on whether we are serving them as they need us to. Now, topics such as ESG are no different than performance, really. If a client's asking, then we'll provide that level of granularity that they desire and then no more, in order to avoid creating that confusion. So we use the Bloomberg terminal and we have robust detail on the characteristics of our holdings, and that can be disclosed to clients who would like it. So to close, you provide the level of detail best suited to the specific client, and this is in keeping with our philosophy of providing a customized solution to every client. So thank you, Pete, for answering Nishimwe's question, and thank you, Nishimwe, for asking. Thank you for listening to this month's episode with Steve Campisi, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Whiskey and Wealth Tech. Thank you.